Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. In many cultures, it's said that children are more susceptible to seeing things beyond the veil, that they have a greater sense of awareness than adults. I think some of tonight's stories showcase this rather well. But what about the others? Because it's not just children reporting these encounters. And what about the encounters with the other unknowns, cryptids? Is it possible the veil is thinner in certain areas, that certain people are more susceptible than others? Well, I like to think that anything's possible. So, let's get started, shall we? Okay, so a couple of months ago, middle of the night, our house alarm starts wailing. And then it made a sound I've never heard it make before. Almost like a record scratched to a stop. I'm up in a flash and our little security monitor says our front door is open. The alarm is still active on the screen, but there's no sound being emitted through the house. I live in a small house. The security panel's in my room, and the front door is located in the living room, right outside of it. I grab my pistol and I slowly lean my head out my bedroom doorway. The front door is indeed wide open. But my 3-year-old daughter is also standing on the porch in her blue Paw Patrol pajamas. I'm bewildered at what I'm seeing. I set the pistol down and I dash to get her inside. There's no way she's able to reach, let alone unlock 2 deadbolts, one being a slide chain. I knew this, and as I put her back to bed, I still pondered the idea of how did she manage to do that, rather than simply, how did this happen? I thought she was sleepwalking at first, because why else would she be walking around at this time? But she was wide awake. She told me she was playing. When I asked, how did she get outside? She says, door was open. I wanted to believe somehow, some way, she was able to accomplish this feat. I really did. So I ignored it. Now, last night at 2 o'clock in the morning, I walked into the living room and I saw my daughter playing peekaboo in the dark. By herself, just sitting there, laughing and doing the motions, saying peekaboo on the floor. I don't know how long she was out there. The only reason I woke up is because of how loud she was squealing with laughter. Call it mother's instincts, but once that specific tone and pitch of your child's voice hits your ears, you're instantly up and alert. When I get to the living room, I flip on the lights and I pick her up. First time I've ever felt weird in my house. I viewed the front door thing as a problem I could eventually solve, but this was just eerie. When I put her back to bed last night, she was instantly back to sleep. This has creeped me out so much that I'm reaching out for help. Any provided theories are welcome as to what the hell is actually happening and what I should do. Help ease my nerves, because all my theories are ending with me getting the house blessed or giving my daughter up for adoption if she keeps doing this, interacting with something I can't see stuff. It's so creepy. I'm a 32-year-old male, and I've always been logic, science, and materialist-oriented. I deny anything's existence without solid, demonstrable proof. But when I was 13, I witnessed something that haunts me to this day. I was over at my friend's house, and his whole family was extremely superstitious. He tried to claim his house was haunted, and I proceeded to condescendingly tell him how ridiculous of a proposition that is. Ghosts don't fucking exist. Only a minute or so before this, I'd set a cordless landline phone on the base incorrectly by accident, as in backwards, so it wasn't charging. Mid-sentence, as I'm acting like a condescending jackass to my friend, telling him not to believe things without evidence, the phone I set down incorrectly started to rattle slowly on the base, then more rapidly, until it flew up 2 feet in the air, flipped over mid-air, and slammed down hard on the base. I immediately tried to blame a gust of wind, but the windows were closed. It couldn't have been an earthquake. We would have all felt one powerful enough to do that. I've thought about this event a lot over these past nearly 20 years, and I absolutely cannot explain where the work of energy came to lift the phone that high off the base. And it's quite a coincidence that the only physics anomaly I've witnessed in my life just happened to occur right as I'm verbally denying the existence of ghosts. Basically, I'm forced to accept there are forces out there that we just have zero awareness of. And if I hadn't witnessed this with my own eyes and someone told me what I've written here, I can guarantee that I wouldn't believe them, and probably would have ridiculed them. Now, when people tell me ghost stories, I'm inclined to believe them, lest I'd be a hypocrite. When I was 7, I used to live in the middle of nowhere, and I do mean nowhere. Our next-door neighbor was a 10-minute drive, the nearest town, if you'd even call it that, more like a street with homes on it. It was about 20 minutes away, and the nearest form of city or town larger than that was about an hour and a half. The house itself was a typical farmhouse. I was in the first bedroom with a view to the long driveway. While we stayed there, it always felt odd to me. Maybe because we were so far from anywhere, or maybe it was just the vibe. But it was here that I had this experience, my first experience, and I'll never forget it. One night I awoke to the sound of quiet talking. It first sounded like that loud whisper when you're trying to be quiet, but more volume than you need. Initially, I thought it was my parents, since I was very close to where the kitchen was. But as I sat and listened, and the whispering became louder, I noticed that these were not my parents, but rather 2 male voices. My first thought wasn't anything supernatural, but rather simply thieves. I was just there listening to them, getting louder and louder. I could hear, and the 2 of them were just talking. One would simply ask a question like, "What is this?" or "What is that?" And the second one would answer, but would be so beyond wrong, but yet have that tone of just simply answering a question. At this time, the voices sound like they are right beside me, just talking away, and as I turn my eyes around, the curious one asks about an object in my room that I was looking at. Of course, the second would answer it, but get it super wrong. These voices that sounded like they were right beside me were somehow using my eyes to look. Needless to say, I'm a kid, and at this point, I'm scared. And what does any kid do when they're scared? Go to their parents. I snuck into their room, and I went to sleep between them. But before that, the first asks,
"Are you sure the kid is not aware of us?"
And the second responded,
"Of course not."
That really freaked me out. This was my first ever experience with something I just could not explain, and that was the only time I ever heard the 2 of them. I am in my 30s now, and honestly, I have a few thoughts on it. But I'm more curious if anyone else has ever experienced something like this before. Hearing two phantom voices, with one asking questions and the other just being an idiot. It was the early 90s, and I was 17 or 18. I'd moved out of my parents' house not long before to not the safest of cities. I was a handful at the time and clashing heads a lot with my parents. I had a great paying job for my age, $16 an hour, and rent was low, $350, so I moved out. Anyway, my best friend and I would go for blunt rides around the city when we were bored. Back in the early 90s, the streets were pretty scenic with crackheads and corner boys. I stupidly had very little fear, and we were used to it. I was driving, we were both pretty smoked out. She was also drinking some sort of liquor straight from the bottle. We'd gone through a yellow light on one of the main roads when I noticed the car behind us had a police light on the roof and was flashing their headlights at me. Oh, fuck. My friend starts freaking out, shoving the bottle under her seat, almost already in tears. Back then, there were undercovers everywhere, so I didn't think twice about it. I pulled to the side of the pretty busy street. I was hiding the blunt and watching the driver take the light off of his roof and start walking towards us. He tells me that he's seen us driving up and down the streets looking for drugs and demands our IDs. He's leaning in and he's close to my face, looking back and forth at the both of us and sniffing the air. Really big guy, kinda unkempt. We fish out our IDs and hand them to him. He tells us that we're in big trouble. In my rebellious, dumb head, I'm thinking, what the fuck for what? We weren't looking for drugs, just joyriding around, smoking some weed. He goes back to his car. By then, my friend is a puddle of tears. She's no angel either. She was just drunk and high and freaking out. He finally comes back and tells us that he talked to his partner. There's another man in his car. And his partner decided to take it easy on us. He said he would let us go with a warning if we gave him all of our weed and went home. I remember quickly calculating the situation. Plain clothes, undercover car, just wants our weed. Shit didn't add up. Just at that moment, an actual police car was driving by on the other side of the street. The guy saw it too and stepped back a little. I just reacted and opened the door and went to the middle of the street waving my arms at the cop car. I remember the look on the guy's face, like a confused, caught kid with nowhere to go. The cops were coming to a light and not going very fast. They stopped right there and I just started asking them before they could say anything. Is this guy a real cop? They looked confused. The guy looked like he didn't know what to do. I was yelling to the real cops that this guy said he was a cop and pulled us over. Guy started fast walking back to his car and partner. The cops left their car in the middle of the street and went after him. They got him. More cops showed up. My high is completely gone. The fake cops' car is swarmed. I finally see them both being taken to a cop car in cuffs. The cop that originally stopped came back to my car with our IDs and explained to us that this wasn't the first time these guys had pulled their fake cop act. He asked me if I was okay to drive home, took our information, and said that they would be in touch. I was shaken, but more mad than anything. We went back to my apartment, and that was that. I had a habit of checking out the police logs and court sentencing in the local paper. I found the guy's court appearance, which also contained a mugshot, and a short article about how many times he had done the same thing to other women. The danger that we could have been in didn't really sink into my stupid teenage brain until I read that he had stabbed 2 of those young women. I still remember his face and his name. The court record said that he got a 20-year sentence. I wasn't a big fan of police back then, but thank God they just so happened to be driving by. I was taking a shower and just staring aimlessly at the shower head, dreaming and pondering of the things that one ponders of during a shower. The shower head had a mirrored surface, and I slowly realized that though I was staring directly at it, my reflection's eyes were looking off to the left. For a moment or two, I wondered how that was possible, and what trick of the beveling was causing my reflection to be looking away, when suddenly my reflection's eyes shifted and looked directly at me, and they continued to return my gaze for the rest of the shower, as if nothing awry had been happening. It's never happened before or since. This might not really be video worthy, but I've wanted to share this since I read The Whistler yesterday, and this has kind of been freaking me out since. I live in a rural area on a rural property. My whole yard is shrouded in darkness. One night about 3 years ago, I was sitting on my back porch steps smoking, when from the darkness I hear a whistle. I immediately broke out in goosebumps and stood up and looked around, but I couldn't see shit in the darkness. I tried to explain it away, it's just a mockingbird, but I still stood right up against my back door, finished my bowl. Then, again, closer and louder. I rushed back inside and grabbed my gun, then stood by the back door for a moment. I calmed myself down and explained it away again. My neighbor was probably walking the property line, saw me smoking, and decided to fuck with me. The next day I texted him and I asked if it was him, and he said no, but whoever it was, they were whistling Dixie. I was relieved that it was just my old redneck neighbor messing with me and forgot about it. A couple of months later, he invited me over to hang out. We were just bullshitting when I mentioned that he scared the hell out of me the other day. The man looks at me dead in the eyes and says, "Dude, did you really hear someone whistle that night? Because I thought you were just fucking with me." It wasn't him. I later confirmed that he doesn't know how to whistle. I never smoke outside at night anymore. When I do, it's right next to the back door. After I read The Whistler yesterday, I feel like I'm going to hear it again in another 10 years. Fucking freaky. We were driving home, my mother in the driver's seat, heading back after spending an eventful day in another much larger town. I wouldn't call it a city, nor would I call it a town. Well, not in my book, at least. We were traveling through the countryside, seeing paddocks and paddocks with the occasional tree here and there. As we got about halfway, my mother asked if it was okay if we took a detour to go see her then boyfriend's place. Seeing the time was about 2 p.m, and I wasn't in any rush to go back home, I told her it was fine, and we turned off the main road. We continued to travel on our new path, the road being a singular paved road. It was one of those that was probably enough room for 2 cars to drive past with no real issue. Anything bigger, on the other hand, than someone was driving on the curb. So we continued talking nonsense, listening to the radio. I looked forward. There in the distance was a man traveling in the same direction we were. Not really out of the ordinary, as there was one of those blink-if-you-miss-it towns nearby. But something about him just grabbed my attention. For starters, he was a farmer. If his attire wasn't the biggest giveaway, but his clothes. He wore a wide rim hat, a shirt, overalls, and boots like something from the 60s or 70s. As we got closer and closer, he seemed to be not noticing us coming up behind him. My mother's car was not quiet. Closer and closer. My eyes fixed on him as we got close, drove by, and he vanishes. My eyes were completely fixed on him. He was there, and then nothing. I quickly looked back, trying to see if he fell or was hiding. No one was there. No place for him to hide. Just an empty road. You saw him too? My mother asks. The farmer, I respond. Yeah. I turned back to her, and she too was shocked. I described what he looked like, and my mother confirmed it. She too saw this guy. I've been on that road many times in the past. Having lived in that area, I know every turn, every curve, every hill. But only that one time have I seen him on that road. I do believe what I saw was a ghost, still reliving his walk back home. Maybe he died on that road or got hit. I don't know, but I'll never forget it. When I was 14, I had a boyfriend who my parents wouldn't let me see. I was so in love with him, as any 14-year-old would be. So much so that I decided it would be a good idea to sneak out of my house at 3 a.m. in an attempt to see him. My boyfriend at the time quite obviously didn't care about my safety in this situation, so he told me to walk all the way to the Taco Bell near his house, which was probably over a half-an-hour walk on foot. But I was stupid, and I wanted to see him, so I agreed. I remember I put on short shorts and other clothes in an attempt to look cute for my boyfriend, completely oblivious to how stupid this would be. I managed to get outside my house, and I started walking down the street. I was nervous, but I was alone, so I didn't feel too threatened. Right as I was passing the power lines, a pickup truck turns onto the road and slowly starts driving towards me. The part that scared me the most was when the car completely stopped, right in front of the power lines, almost trapping me in. I saw a man inside the car look at me, and right in that moment, I got so scared I started running as fast as I could forward, and I wound up in front of a kid from school's house that I was friends with. I started knocking on his window in a panic, and he opened his blinds, and I explained what happened. He said he would tell his older brother. I begged his older brother to take me to the Taco Bell so I could see my boyfriend, but he kept saying that he would only drive me home. I still wonder what that guy had intentions of doing. My grandmother would always tell me about knocking that she would hear either a few days before or moments before someone close to her would pass away. It would be around 3 knocks in no particular place. She said she would sometimes hear it at the door behind the wall, or coming from outside. My grandmother had always kind of had this weird gift to see and experience things that I guess were paranormal, for lack of a better word. She would always tell me her experiences. Me, not being the bravest person on earth, would get so scared I wouldn't be able to sleep well for days. I always thought the knocks were interesting whenever she told me about it, because not long after it usually happened. Someone would die. Or she would complain for days that she wasn't sleeping, and then the 3 knocks would happen as well as other weird things. So I was open to the idea of these knocks due to the fact that, evidently, people sometimes passed away. Last year, the 3 knocks happened to me. It was a Friday morning, and that entire week my grandmother's sister, Suri, had been fighting COVID in the hospital. Suri was the second closest thing to a grandmother for me, so I had a great love for her. I wouldn't say we were close, but there was that grandmotherly love that she always had given me. When I woke up, I was still between that state of being very sleepy but also fully aware of my surroundings as I wasn't asleep. I know I had my back to the door of my room when I heard 3 faint but audible knocks on my door. I opened my mouth to say, "Yes?" Then it hit me like a train that I'd heard absolutely no one walk to the door or open any of the doors we had in the hallway. And trust me when I say I have the loudest family. So, I should have heard someone or something. My body froze and a chill went right down my back. For a good minute, I was too terrified to move. I laid in bed for a while to listen if anyone would maybe walk away or open the door to confirm if it was indeed one of my family members. But no, nothing but silence after that. I even thought my brother was trying to scare me. Anyways, long story short, exactly, and I kid you not, exactly 3 days later, after I heard those 3 knocks, my grandmother's sister Suri passed away that morning. The whole experience freaked me out. I still struggle to comprehend what happened, but it did. There's probably a logical explanation, but the fact that she died a while after really scared me and made me think about what my grandmother always told me. So nothing too crazy, but I do have a little story about my childhood home. It was the summer of 2012. Life was good, and I was up at 2 a.m. watching Teen Nick in my house's den. The whole house was always fascinating to me. One of the first houses built in our small town in Kansas during the Prohibition as a moonshiner's illegal party house. The whole house is a colonial style full of Victorian features. From the outside, it looks like a 2-story, but there are actually 3 floors and half a basement. The architecture was always confusing as to how this was accomplished, but wedged between the top and main floor is a log cabin-themed room, our family room or den. It was a glorified bar room fitted with a monstrous fireplace, an Alaskan moose head from circa 1920, and a salvaged chandelier from the former Douglas Opera House. I hated being alone in that room at night. I always got a weird sensation like someone standing over me when I'd try to sleep on the couch after a long night of TV. My best friend and I also felt this from time to time, sleeping in my own bed, which used to be in the master suite. Never could get the cat or dog to hang out in the den, though. Its door was an inch thick of solid wood and had a very complex lock that remained tucked inside its latch. No previous owner had the key. We never bothered to close it. It would get stuck in the frame because it was so heavy, designed to keep the police out if someone tipped off a booze party. There was a nursery on the top floor that shared a wall with this room. It was sold to us with no doorknob to the small 4x10 room. It became our home office. There was a brand new computer and an all-in-one printer fax that remained unplugged and rarely used. My bedroom was right next to it, and I always slept with my door open. In the middle of the night, I could often see the computer light up and paper would cycle through the printer. Could never get myself to check it until the morning. When we looked at the sheets, there was nothing on them, and we just load them back inside. It was my sister and I's favorite place to pirate scary movies. We would close the door as to not disturb Mom and Dad because it didn't latch. But one night, she left me in the room to go get a snack, and when she came back, she couldn't open the door. I was trapped inside. My mom had to use a butter knife to force the handle. I was shook, given the timing. But back to the den. I'm minding my teen Nick business when, out of the blue, I get a call from my friend. She tells me that she's using a Ouija board, which I've always done my part to stay far from. She says that her presence told her to call me. She informed me that I was wearing a black shirt, which I was, and I only own one. I hung up the call and immediately went to my bedroom to wait out the next few hours to daylight. That same summer, my mom, grandma, sister, and I went on one of our late-night drives where we blast oldies while cruising the back roads. As we were driving, an unidentifiable creature ran in front of our car and across the road. None of us agreed on what we saw. We thought it was a very large white rabbit, cat, or small dog. It was moving unthinkably fast for any of those animals. It made it across the road in 2 hops. All the time we joked about it and kept on our way. When we got home and stepped into the foyer, heavy work boots start down the upstairs hall and then down the stairs. They stop at the den level. From the foyer, you can see the part of the staircase that leads to the den. No one is there. We're all looking at each other, waiting for my father to continue his trip down the stairs. He then comes up from the basement, followed by our dog. The cat is chilling in the window on the main floor. We sent my dad upstairs to investigate. He checked everywhere, even the attic. Nothing. It could all be coincidence. When we moved into an apartment that fall, nothing else strange seemed to happen. I am tempted to ask the family who lives there now if they've ever experienced anything. The original owners are buried in the morgue just down the street. One day I'd gone to visit my aunt for the weekend, but I had been out partying. I'd come back at about 10 a.m. telling her that I was going to sleep for a bit, but that I was going to leave again later that night. I went to her basement to sleep on the futon. The basement was really dim. I laid there, tossing and turning for what felt like 10, 20 minutes. I then checked the time. It was already 10 p.m. I thought to myself, no way. Well, I sat down there, messaging my cousin, who was supposed to be coming to get me. He said he was on his way. Hours had passed. Next thing I knew, it was 2:30 a.m. I'd been jumping to get a look out the basement window, and I got a weird feeling that I wasn't alone. I grabbed a stool to stand on. I stood there looking. Suddenly, a hard, scratching noise on the cement wall was happening not too far behind me and getting closer to my ear. froze, turning my head slowly to find no one there. I got down and suddenly there were 4 bangs coming from the furnace. And usually it was just one every half hour. I walked to the other window, and before I passed the stairs, I saw a shadow peek its head out from behind the stairs. I thought to myself, we've been through stuff like this. As long as you're not bothered, they can't bother you. But as soon as I got to the other side of the stairs, there was a shadow or a person just standing there, staring at me. I looked out the window. Still no sign of my cousin, but I ran upstairs and out of the house. Getting to the street, there he was, pulling up. That's been the closest that anything's ever gotten to me, and I somewhat believe it had intent to hurt me. So last night, I'd gone out to my front yard to let my dog out so he could do his business. To preface, he's not the type of dog that'll chase after anything, really. He's pretty calm and just kind of vibes when he sees squirrels or animals and doesn't pay much attention to them. He's more preoccupied with sniffing around and doing his thing. My driveway is sort of long, the typical countryside driveway. So he suddenly, out of nowhere, just takes off down the driveway toward the road, and naturally I take off after him. I cut on the light on my phone, and as I was running after him, I kept calling him, but he wouldn't listen. He's never been the type of dog to not listen when I call him, even if he's distracted. After running halfway down the driveway, we're in the pitch black, and I finally see him come up at the edge of my light. Like I said, he's a pretty calm dog and rarely growls, but he was full on growling like he was going to kill something. He was about 20 or 30 feet in front of me, and about 15, 20 feet ahead of him was a set of red-orange, glowing eyes, about twice as tall as he is, so about 5 feet off the ground. And as soon as I see them, this scream that sounded sort of human but unnatural as hell comes from this thing. I immediately took off toward the house with my dog, almost beat him back to the house. The entire time, I had this sickening gut feeling like I was going to die. Not long afterward, I was in the kitchen trying to calm down, and this very quick, sharp knock, around 3 or 4 successive knocks, comes from my side door that faces the driveway. After that, I didn't experience anything else. If anyone has any idea of what it might have been, I'd be glad to hear it. My roommate said it might have been an injured deer, but the gut response I had makes it hard to believe. I know deer can sometimes make freakishly human sounds, but this sounded like nothing I've ever heard before. It's hard to describe what it sounded like in words, other than just wrong, but I really hope it was just a deer. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. But don't miss a brand new one every Friday night. I want to give a big thanks to those who shared their stories, and thanks to all of you for listening. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to The Darkest Hour, and tap the bell so you never miss a thing. I sure do appreciate all of it, and I can't thank you enough. Huge shout out to all of my patrons for their unwavering support. MISANTHROPIA, Shane Q, Monica L, The Dark Cosmos, Zoe Watt, Charlene B, Rat Girl, ALISHA S, and ERIN G. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. You can keep up with me and all things Darkest Hour over on my Instagram @thedarkesthouryt. Or if you prefer, follow me on Twitter @AmandaJaneTDH. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, AmandaDarkestHour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.